The government of India strongly claims that the Indian economy at this moment is marching confidently towards becoming the third largest economy in the next few years. It could happen in 28, 29, 30, but that this is India's moment, and that because of the policy moves over the past 10 years, India has been set on a very firm path of growth. Now, how much of that is the new reality, and how much of that is hype, where we need to be wary of the big numbers and look below the bonnet, as it were? To talk about this, we're joined by two distinguished economists. Can I have a very warm round of applause as I welcome Dr. Arvind Subramanian, special in many ways also because he's come down specially from the United States for this. So we really appreciate that. And we've got Dr. Shamika Ravi joining us as well. So can we have a very, very warm round of applause for them and for their presence at the conclave. I want to start by getting Dr. Subramanian to explain what is it that makes you wary at this moment. You know, we heard from the finance minister, we heard from the prime minister, they're painting a very bullish picture, and a lot of Indians, frankly, think that the Indian economy is moving in the right direction. When, as a well-wisher, you look at the India economic story, Dr. Subramanian, what makes you most wary, anxious, and concerned?
Well, thanks, Rahul. Thanks. It's great to be here and to be with Shamika on this panel. First of all, let me begin with a prefatory remark, Rahul, that, you know, in some ways, we're only having this, you know, is it hype or reality? Because there is a reality, a substantive number of achievements that the government has made, which we're well aware of. You know, the old saying is, the best lie is one which is closest to the truth. So we're only having the reality hype thing because there is a lot of reality. And in fact, I do want to speak about some of the lesser known, you know, early signs of success, if I may. Can I, yeah? So I think on the plus side, you know, we've all seen, you know, the build-up of the physical infrastructure, you know, the digital revolution in India, you know, the Prime Minister's new welfareism, providing goods to people, you know, and the banking system has become more robust, et cetera, et cetera. But I think I see one or two early signs of things that have never happened before, which kind of give me a little bit of, you know, extra optimism, as it were. The first thing, of course, is that we see now, especially in some of the southern states, you're seeing a revival of manufacturing in a way that we never saw before. And I think what is particularly interesting about these developments is that you're seeing factories coming up at scale, employing 5, 10, 15, 20,000 workers, which we never saw before. And I think that's very encouraging, the kind of scale. The second very encouraging sign, of course, is if we can put up that chart on the, you know, the services exports, how India is actually gaining global market share. And it's a very different kind. India has in some ways diversified and gone upscale from the first, you know, the IT revolution. You know, Dr. Nayamurthy is here, and you will see we had a first wave in the early 2000s. India's global export market share rose, and now we're seeing, no, I think this is the wrong, oh yeah, the high skilled one. And you can see now a second wave, you know, the global capability centers and so on. So I think there are some new things that are happening, early signs, which I think give. Having said that, let me turn to your question. What do I kind of find somewhat challenging and difficult to understand and worrying also? First of all, I want to be honest with you that the latest GDP numbers, I just simply cannot understand them. I say that with genuine, you know, respect and things. They're absolutely mystifying. They don't add up. I don't know what they mean. Because of that, I look at some of the other indicators at what's happening in the
Why aren't you believing the government's growth numbers?
if you want me to launch into some of the details, I'm happy to. But essentially, the numbers don't add up. I'll just give you a couple of examples. The implied inflation in these numbers is 1 to 1.5%. Actual inflation in the economy is somewhere between 3 and 5%. The economy is growing at 7.5%, even though private consumption is at 3%. And in the latest data, the errors and omissions, what is not accounted for, actually it's about 4.3 percentage points out of the 7.6. So there's a lot of stuff about the numbers which, I don't understand. I'm not saying these are wrong or these are right. That's for others to judge. I just don't understand them. That's why I want to look at some of the other indicators. And to me, the 2 or 3 big indicators are, we keep hearing that the economy has become a very good place to invest in. You showed earlier the chart on foreign direct investment, right? Which, by the way, in the last few quarters and last few years, can we put up the number again? It's actually declined very sharply. Then on top of that, if you look at the overall private, see, if you look at this, the white line here, you can see foreign direct investment actually collapsed quite a bit. So the question is that if this China plus one opportunity has been created, why isn't more coming in? And by the way, just to elaborate on that, it's not just that India's FDI is coming down as a share of GDP. India's share of global FDI going to emerging markets has also come down. So the question is, if India has become such an attractive place, why isn't there more foreign direct investment? And even more important, if you can put up the chart on private investment, corporate investment, that's well, I hope we can put it up, that's well below levels in 2016 and way below levels when we had our boom in the early 2000s. So the puzzling question is, why isn't investment, routinely we hear captains of industry coming and praising the economy. It's as if they're saying one thing in public, but actually you don't see the numbers in the data at all.
So you've set the stage for this debate, and I want to get Dr. Shamika Ravi, who works closely with the government of the day, to respond to some of this. One, the assertion that a lot of economists seem to have, or some economists seem to have, that the government is painting a rosier picture than the reality, and that India Inc., for various reasons, may say certain things in public, but look at their private investment numbers. Those numbers tell their own story. So don't go by what they're saying, see by what their balance sheets are saying in terms of how much they're investing. Dr. Ravi.
So first of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's always wonderful to be back at this forum. Now, the way Arvind and I look at the world and the economy are very different. He is a macroeconomist. He looks at macro indicators. I really go to the economy with a lens. And I'm an applied microeconomist. If you look at the FDI numbers that were put up, they were as a percentage of the GDP. Now, your GDP is, you are the fastest major economy, and you have remained so for some time now. So there are 2 variables that are in that. It's the FDI and then there is the GDP, right? And you're really looking at the share of that. What has been done right now, it is like an accounting exercise, and I think that's valuable in itself, but I think an economic insight would be to really go a little deeper into that to figure out, are we becoming more efficient at using FDI perhaps? Because it's been now many years, many decades of these flows. So I think you need a little more nuanced sort of a look into some of this to understand what is happening to the FDI and the efficiency of the FDI that is coming into the economy. That's number one. As far as the private investments are concerned, you see, I think it's very important to be honest amongst each other that, in some ways, the state of India, by which I mean the government, the judiciary, etc., because it takes all. Everyone has to play ball for this growth story and, this to unfold. Since 2012, you have had such tremendous shocks in the form of whether it was the retrospective tax, whether it was institutions basically annulling allocations which were legit as well as illegal, but even legit ones after 20 years of growth. These, I don't know if one recognizes that these are body blows to private confidence. And it has taken us about a decade. You are beginning to see a growth in the last few quarters in private investment. But that is the long-term impact of some of these absolutely disastrous policies that we witnessed under the UPA 2 regime, unfortunately. Which is why, we look at measures which are irrefutable, Rahul. जिसमें I'm not going to argue base year क्या है, deflator में we are going to quibble. I'm going to therefore measure and look at, which is what I have been publishing, look at satellite data, daytime satellite data.
Okay, so let's do that. So we worked with Dr. Ravi's office, and there are two visualizations we'll show you. One is the annualized growth rate of built-up surfaces across parliamentary constituencies. So you see what happened from 2010 to 2015, and then you will see what happened from 15 to 20. So what this argues is wherever the color is darker, the darker suggests that the growth of built-up surface areas is higher. The lighter color.
No, Rahul, you have the luxury of me being here. Let me explain my research. You see, this is daytime satellite image at a resolution of 10 meter into 10 meter. Can you imagine how accurate it is? It's not Indian data. It's not government of India's data. This is the European Commission having spent billions of dollars. This data is now put up. And you have this at the parliamentary constituency because that is what we focused on, but you have it also at a sub-district level. What you're seeing is, and this is built-up area is an incredibly useful proxy or an indicator to look at what is the economic activity at a ground level. And built-up surface is not just infrastructure, by the way, which is the government side of the story. This is residential, this is non-residential, this is all kinds of construction and building that is happening, all kinds of building. What you notice, and these are every 5 years, is you have an 18% increase in this measure or economic activity since 15, right? In fact, if you compare this with UPA 1, because you can go back, these are 5-yearly epoch, you're seeing that that difference is almost 30%. But beyond just looking at the average, because all India statistics that macroeconomists look at, it's a national GDP, national FDI, I'm telling you, where is the growth happening? So this kind of an approach to economy and measurement.
So I'm very curious now to get Dr. Subramanian to respond to it, because the argument that's playing out here, one is a micro lens at what's happening on the ground, the other is a more macro 30,000 feet view. Now, she spoke of efficiency, that whatever money is coming in internationally is used more efficiently with lesser corruption, and whatever the government is also spending is more efficiently, and therefore the multiplier effect is higher. The second is that look at, for example, and she's just given one data point about, say, built-up areas, which was on the ground, there is economic activity at a speed higher than at any time in the past, Dr. Subramanian.
Firstly, I don't want to turn it into a kind of a dry kind of academic debate that may not be very interesting for the audience. I mean, just to look at all this in terms of parliamentary constituencies is a bit odd for me because, change takes place as a result of actions by the central government, by the state government, and so on. So to make the parliamentary constituency, it's as if saying that all the relevant policy actions are being taken at the constituency level, when in fact that's, kind of not the case, these things. Second, I think is that even if I'm reading your number right for the second, for the growth rate for 2015 to 2020, it's something like 3.5% per year. That's not what was being claimed, 7-8%. And the third thing I would really urge all of us is that, I don't want to get into this, UPA did this, NDA did this, because as I wrote in a piece recently, that whatever the achievements and the failures we've had over the last 10, 15 years are cumulative and bipartisan. Anything that we've done, take for example, the JAM Trinity, for which this government deserves a lot of credit. I mean, the seeds were sowed earlier in the previous government. And I can go on and on. I think it's not very interesting to say, this happened in this point and that happened, and therefore we get into political bickering rather than saying, what does the government need? Are we on the right path? What are the deficiencies, and so on?
So let's spend a moment on that, because the one other big debate at this moment is around manufacturing, and whether India is indeed becoming a manufacturing, I wouldn't say powerhouse, but a manufacturing center. Are we benefiting adequately from the China plus one pivot in global supply chains? And whether we are doing whatever is possible, or is the opportunity really being captured by countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico, and the others? So I want you, Dr. Subramanian, to first begin by highlighting what you think are the problems with government schemes like production-linked incentives, the Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, all of which sound like the right thing to do. And they are. Are they working in your view?
I think that's a great question, Rahul. So let me, can we put up the chart on manufacturing, please, our global export market share? So I think we're doing very well in services and the Global Capability Center. And it's true that we have launched all these schemes. But if you look at manufacturing, for example, our global share in low-skill manufacturing exports, which is apparel, etc., look at the levels. It's like 2.7%. China's for this would be something like 40% of the global share of exports. And as someone said, global thing. And again, remember, this is not a failure of this government alone. This is a cumulative failure. And as you can see, while it's come down from the peaks of the mid-2000s, our level has been uniformly low. So this is an endemic problem in India, but it's not that we're making significant progress on that. If anything, our global market share has come down. So the question to ask ourselves is, what do we need to do? Because make no mistake.
No, but that's one way of looking at it. The other is a lot of manufacturing that's now beginning to happen in India is happening also because of the size of the Indian domestic market, and is coming in largely because they think India is a big enough market to manufacture for India, apart from what may get exported.
I think, Rahul, this is something that we really need to disabuse ourselves of, that we are a big market. We are not a very big market. So let me give you some numbers. Let's say India's GDP is something like $2.5–3 trillion, okay? And if you look at what is the middle class market share of that, I would say it's about 750 billion to, about 40 to 45% of that. That's the middle class consumption market. You compare that with the global economy, it's 20–30 trillion. So I think we are making the mistake now of thinking that we can grow based on the domestic market, which I think is a fatal error of judgment. Because no country in the post-war period, and let me re-emphasize, no successful country in the post-war period, China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, ever achieved 7–8% growth without 15% growth in manufacturing exports. And you cannot get that from the domestic market.
Dr. Ravi, do you want to weigh in on this argument that yes, there is some manufacturing activity, but the base is very low? And when I spoke to Dr. Raghuram Rajan at Davos, he made the same argument that your base is so low, to show some growth on a very low base is just aiming for too little. We must aim for much higher, because that's the appetite the government claims it has. And therefore, we're getting carried away and excited by very small wins. We're not playing the big game. If you look at the big global picture, it's Mexico, it's Vietnam, it's countries like that. Those are the true beneficiaries of the China plus one pivot.
But that's again, Rahul, and I agree with Arvind when he says there's a continuum. It's not like the country became totally different in 2014. When I moved to Delhi in 2013, it was accepted wisdom in Delhi circuits of public policy that India has missed the manufacturing bus. And I bet most of you who have been reading anything on government policy in manufacturing, you must have come across this phrase. India has missed the manufacturing bus. Now, and some people continue to say that, it is so naive, because you are assuming that we are going to do exactly what China did, or that is the growth model. The whole world is growing. It's not just the OECD. Your Latin America is growing, Africa is growing, the rest of Asia is growing. And as these parts of the world grow, the demand for simple manufacturing, shirts, shoes, books, pens, bottles, everything around you, these are not high-tech. That whole demand will continue to grow. There are buses and buses coming. The point is, now we are onto a bus, finally. So we have had to reorient the thinking, not just at the central, but I must say across the states, to say that manufacturing is very important. Now, we are also in a very different world today than we were 10 years back. Do you know how much China spends on industrial policy? 1.7% of its GDP. Do you know that is more than what they spend on their defense? Do you realize the strategic importance of government and industrial policy and what is happening in the world today? You have to respond to that. So to think that we are going to make a switch from agriculture, unskilled, semi-skilled, whatever, to services, and that is going to be, no, I'm sorry, that is just not going to happen in an economy where you have 600 million workforce, right? So I think that's an important way to look at it. By
You want to make a quick
pragmatic.
interjection?
No, I think Shamika makes a really important point, which is why, I think it's worth, but I kind of got a bit confused. But remember that the services boom that we are witnessing today, that can produce dynamism. It cannot produce inclusive growth because by definition, global capability centers services provide good employment for 1, 2, 3% of the workforce. So if you need inclusive growth, and I think that's what Shamika was saying, that we need to do, the shoes, the textiles, the apparel, etc. Where I think Shamika is also absolutely right is that, but this window is not open forever because of stuff like, artificial intelligence, robots, etc. Just to give you one example.
No, but can I just challenge you to say that that's much easier said than done? Look at what she's saying, that we were just standing at the bus stop, the buses were going past. Now we got into some kind of a bus. Okay, the bus isn't moving with as much speed as it should, but at least we're on a bus. Earlier we weren't even on the manufacturing bus. What do you
but
think
Rahul,
the
the bus
government
is
should
moving.
be doing, Dr. Subramanian?
Yeah.
Which they aren't. Like, what is it that you say, okay, they really ought to be doing this, which they aren't?
Let me give you a couple of responses on that. I think that what the government needs to do, take the PLI for example, right? The PLI, if you look at the numbers, it's very tilted towards, skill-intensive, capital-intensive sectors. We should, building on what Shamika said, we should be building on that to really promote, the leather, the footwear, the textiles, the clothing, etc. And in Tamil Nadu, for example, and Karnataka, that's happening to some extent. But we should be wooing global investors in those sectors that are going to produce a lot
Why
of
don't we do
employment.
that?
Yeah.
Why is it more towards semiconductors, chips,
Oh, it's
telecom?
across the board, Rahul. It's across the board. In fact, the point is, was it limited to parliamentary constituency? No, that's the shapefile that you had, so we put it out. That analysis is at a district level where an administration runs, is at a sub-district level where your taluk or your blocks are run. And when you look at that analysis, you are seeing that the biggest growth, and construction, by the way, is a very important part of the economy, the real estate, etc. You have had the biggest growth since 15 in the smallest or the least developed parts of your country. So when we are talking about inclusive growth, it means regional, sort of
So
variation.
this is such a yes.
In response to your question, I think the question that all of us should confront about government policy, it's done a lot of good things. I would make a distinction between hardware, where the government has done very well, versus the software. And, subsidies, good, you're trying it, etc. You still don't see any outcomes. I think the heart, we should examine ourselves. Is there something about government policy that is creating a level playing field for all investors or not? Or is it the case that some are favored over others?
No, so let me come to
arbitrary action, the sense that you are safe, that there won't be arbitrary action, that some, houses will not be favored or others. Otherwise, I cannot understand why, despite the hardware being done, despite the banking system being cleaned up, despite the China plus one opportunity, our private investment is stuck.
So you think it's because they're fearful of vindictive action?
That's a question I'd like to pose.
So let Shamika Ravi respond to this, because we're also at the end of this debate, and this is such a fascinating economic conversation. I could go on all night with this. But this assertion that the reason that private investment isn't coming in, given where we are in the utilization cycle, is because, they won't tell you on the face, and they won't say this at the India Today conclave, but privately they are fearful that some corporate groups are benefiting, that you say you've ended crony capitalism, but that is not really correct, because if it wasn't, and if India Inc. wasn't fearful, at this stage of our utilization cycle, there would be more investment in all kinds of activity.
So first of all, the PLIs are working in sectors that they are working, and cell phone is an example. So let's not sweepingly say PLIs are not working. An important thing to remember is that in the current global environment, with every country, major countries now doing a make in X great again, or make in the US, or make in Germany, etc., you have to have a policy where manufacturing in India, make in India, etc., is a priority. That's number one. So you have to do it. It's of strategic importance. The second is, are they fearful? Well, that's another myth. And I'm actually surprised you call it truth versus reality, as if the reality is untrue. I mean, the point is, in the recent, if you look at the last few quarters, you've had an uptick. And that's what I'm trying to tell you, that the death blows that came in the form of retrospective or the coal allocations, etc., it takes a while to build confidence. And unlike most countries, where major capex by the government crowds out private investment, Rahul, India is one country that has never followed that average path. If you look at the data of the last 50 years, in India, growing capital expenditure by the government always crowds in private investment. So it's a matter of when you're seeing the economy grow, the way I have shown you, at least in terms of things that are irrefutable, private investment follows with a certain lag, right? And it is happening.
Okay.
Is it happening everywhere is the question. But PLI, also we have to have a scientific approach to it. It's not working everywhere, but it's working in sectors. There's a trial and error about policy as well. So we're not going to randomly scale up in sectors where, because we do not have 1.7% of GDP of the size of China to throw at industry, and that's the real competition that you're up against.
So around one.
We're out of time. Okay, very briefly.
See, the other thing that worries me, and it kind of something that Arun mentioned at the beginning and something that you said as well, is that I think one worries about government action. Is it being consistent? Is it being fair? Is it being arbitrary? Is that the reason? The other thing that worries me is that, fine, we're giving subsidies. I think that we have turned inward once again in terms of our tariff policy, in terms of restrictions, and so on. So the bigger question for Indian policymakers is, we say, and I agree with that we want to conquer the world because that's where the jobs are, the manufacturing is, but our orientation is once again come inward. Are these two consistent is something that I would like to pose for the audience.
So we're out of time on this session, and this is truly a fascinating conversation because answering some of these questions is central to where we end up in 2030. And Dr. Subramanian is here, and hopefully some of you who've come in for the conclave can have conversations with him on the sidelines. I want to thank Shamika Ravi and Dr. Subramanian for joining us. We're like radiologists doing an X-ray. You can see what the X-ray is telling you now, whether it is because there is fear or because there was the pandemic and retrospective tax, trying to clear that up so the lung is being cleared. Now, what's the reason? Everyone has their own theory, but this has been a very fascinating conversation. And
Rahul, I do think you should spend a moment, because you didn't, is that what the government has accomplished in the last 10 years in terms of targeting the bottom 2 quintiles, which is the saturation, basic amenities. You didn't put up those graphs. But 50% of the bottom 20% had electricity. Today that number is above 90, right? Same for toilets, drinking water. You should view what is happening in India today as something that happened in the US in the 1940s post the war. You are expanding basic amenities to all citizens everywhere in the country because this is the foundation for long-term sustainable economic growth. So it's not just, let's try make in India today, let's try services. No. You have to have a 100-year vision of what exactly will it take to unleash eventually human capital. People make nations, people build countries, and that is the effort.
Sure. Can we have a warm round of applause for Dr. Shamika Ravi and Dr. Arvind Subramanian? It's very nice to have these genteel but sophisticated, high-quality economic debates. I'm very thankful for your time. Thank you for making the effort.